All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Medical ethics. We are here to look at third-party obligations, duty to warn, duty to protect. And in our textbooks, this is on page 101, conflicting professional roles and responsibilities. The Tarasoff case, which is kind of the archetypal, the first big case that brought this to the public attention in the way it did. And so, you can read the little excerpt in our textbook, but I'm going to use this. All right, I'll just read through and see what they miss. On October 27th, 1969, University of California, Berkeley graduate student Prosenjit Podar sought out Berkeley student Tatiana Tarasoff while she was alone in her home, shot her with a pellet gun, chased her into the street with a kitchen knife, and stabbed her 17 times, causing her death. Wow. Podar became enamored with Tatiana Tarasoff and was confused and enraged when she rejected his advances. On June 5th, 1969, Podar sought and received emergency psychological treatment from Dr. Lawrence Moore, a psychologist employed at the Cowell Memorial Hospital at the University of California at Berkeley. The plot thickens. So, Podar went on a couple dates. She turned him away. He got upset, couldn't handle it. He saw Dr. Moore 7 times. On August 20th, 1969, during his 7th therapy session, Podar confessed that he planned to kill Tatiana Tarasoff. Dr. Moore diagnosed Podar with having an acute and severe paranoid schizophrenic reaction. He and two other doctors determined that Podar should be committed to a psychiatric hospital for observation and contacted the police. However, the police only briefly detained Podar, releasing him after he promised to stay away from Tarasoff. Following Podar's release, Dr. Harvey Powelson, Dr. Moore's superior, instructed the police to return the letter from Dr. Moore instructing them to detain Podar, ordered that the letter and all notes taken on Podar be destroyed, and instructed Dr. Moore to take no further action in detaining Podar. First of all, everyone should go back and reread those last couple of sentences. What did Dr. Moore's superior advise him to do? Destroy the evidence? I have gone and looked over the years for what happened to Dr. Harvey Powelson, the superior. Nothing. Can't find him. If any of you can find out that something happened, that he was followed up and held accountable for this, oh, please send it to me. After that, the doctors who examined Podar never notified Tarasoff or her family about Podar's threatening statements. Podar never returned to therapy and killed Tatiana as planned. So just right here, just pause and think to yourself, did the doctors act ethically? Right? They they're in therapy with Podar. He expresses homicidal tendencies. They call the police, right? They say, hey, I have an obligation to this kid. Call the police. Police come, question him, decide he's sane and safe enough to be released. And the doctors are like, I've done my duty, right? The question at the table is, did they have a duty to Tatiana or her family, right? You don't have a duty to protect everyone in the world, right? You have a duty to protect, you have a duty, a specific duty to the people around you. You have a duty based on your actions. And so kind of the case, when it went to the Supreme Court, looked at to what extent do we have third-party obligations in this context? But just to finish up, at his criminal trial, Podar pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Psychologists who evaluated Podar prior to the murder presented evidence at the trial demonstrating that Podar lacked a culpable mental state at the time of the murder because he was insane and a paranoid schizophrenic. Oh, don't we love it? I love a lot of things about this. Although the trial court convicted Podar of second-degree murder, the Court of Appeal reduced the crime to manslaughter. On appeal, the California Supreme Court determined that even the charge of manslaughter was too harsh under the circumstances, reversed the conviction. Podar was never retried and was allowed to return to India, where he reportedly married a lawyer and led a normal life. Yes, that's right, friends. This guy who couldn't handle being turned down, not very thick skin, chased this girl out in the road, hacked her and shot her with a BB gun, moved back to India, got married, had a normal life. Might even still be alive. I bet he is. I bet he is. Someone find out. Podar Prosenjit's still alive. Excuse me. Following Podar's criminal trial, Cherasov's parents sued the psychiatrists and police who were involved in treating Podar. The charges against the police were ultimately dropped because the police were immune to the suit. But regardless of the therapist's unsuccessful attempts to confine Podar, since they knew that Podar was at large and dangerous, their failure to warn Tatiana or others likely to apprise her of the danger constituted a breach of the therapist's duty to exercise reasonable care to protect Tatiana. And so, were the therapists at fault? Normally, I would have us look in the arguments. Oh, I'm here. Where are you? Outline the majority argument for creating a duty to warn third parties, and then look at the minority. But I will include these notes. And basically, the conclusion is when a therapist determines, pursuant to the standards of his profession, or pursuant to the standards of his profession should determine. So either the therapist determines or your profession has determined this, right? That his patient presents a serious danger of violence to another. He incurs an obligation to use reasonable care to protect the intended victim against such danger. This may entail warning the victim or notifying the police or whatever steps are reasonably necessary under the circumstances. Therefore, he incurs an obligation to use reasonable care. Where is my... Here we go. Let's keep my... sorry, everybody. Just trying to find my... I guess that's what I want, yeah. He incurs an obligation to use reasonable care to protect the intended victim. And this is interesting. So here they say this duty to warn may entail warning the victim or notifying the police or whatever steps are reasonably necessary under the circumstances. This is what they mean by a duty to protect. So not only is warning necessary sometimes it might be necessary to forcefully incapacitate, right? To restrain someone from leaving, right? To use physical, the initiation of force to stop somebody. So, failure to detain, failure to warn. They go through some case precedents. They demonstrate that courts have already held that a doctor, for instance, is liable to persons infected by his patient if he negligently fails to diagnose a contagious disease or, having diagnosed the illness, fails to warn members of his patient's family. So already the courts, they're saying, have recognized in case law that physicians have a responsibility not only to their patient, but to warn people that are within immediate danger, right, of warning them. They use the case of uh, the VA arranged for a patient to work on a local farm, but didn't inform the farmer of the patient's background. And after the farmer lets the patient come and go, the patient drove to his wife's house and killed her, right? And the VA was found accountable because they could have foreseen that danger, knowing what they knew about his condition and not having warned anyone. And so they say, case law should dispel any notion that to impose on therapists a duty to take precautions for the safety of persons threatened by a patient, where due care so requires, is in any way opposed to contemporary ground rules on the duty relationship. On the contrary, there now seems to be sufficient authority to support the conclusion that by entering into a doctor-patient relationship, the therapist becomes sufficiently involved to assume some responsibility for the safety not only of the patient, but also of any third person whom the doctor knows to be threatened by the patient. So, in conclusion, famously, they say We conclude that the public policy favoring protection of the confidential character of patient psychotherapist communications must yield to the extent to which disclosure is essential to avert danger to others. The private privilege ends where the public peril begins. That's the classic thing, right? You are free, right, to have your privacy and to live, you'll keep your secrets up until the extent that it's publicly dangerous, right? I mean, think about like a person who admits they tested positive for COVID, but is still flying and going into large crowds and reveals that to some therapist, some, trusted worker. Do you as a worker have a duty to warn others? They just caused some problems in that person's life. They showed trust to you, right? Uh, okay, so that's the majority argument. I'm gonna look at the minority argument now. But hopefully, like at least hopefully the story is clear. Hodar went to see therapy, revealed, was sharing, I'm upset, I can't get over her, I want to kill her. It actually comes out that he didn't say her name, which is an interesting part of the case law that falls out of this. Clearly identified victims, specifically threatened, identified victims, right? That's kind of the original case law precedence. It gets then, we're going to look at it, gets expanded into this like zone of danger, right? Where, for instance, the victim doesn't even need to be clearly identified or threatened necessarily. So, what's the minority argument say? Love this. Oh man, I personally have gone back and forth on this case many times over the years. So we'll see where I end up today, I guess. So, Justice Clark for the minority thinks that this policy is going to be just disastrous. Because basically, what's this policy saying? This policy is saying that if you go in for therapy, and Lord knows we need therapy. I mean, think what shouldn't you might make the case that if we have a right to healthcare, right, and we're going to look at this next week, that we definitely have a right to like be able to access mental health experts. I mean, who couldn't benefit from having someone they can just write to and share all the crazy stuff going on in their head? Excuse me. Basically, someone to just validate your experience of life, right? Well, Justice Clark, the dissenting part of the Supreme Court, said no. If we do this, basically we're saying anytime our patient says anything that might endanger somebody else, we have to go report them to authorities and disclose that. Well, what's that going to do for like the success of our therapy? I mean, how many people have like come home, just like, I fucking hate my boss, or like, traffic was so bad, I wish these people would just drive off the road. They're on their phones, on their SUVs and their Hummers. Those things have never been on a gravel road. What the hell are they compensating for, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Should they be reported, right? I wish these dumb people would just, fall off a cliff. Is that a duty to warn, or are you just blowing steam off, right? So the dissenting party is like, this is very dangerous because now you're basically saying that a doctor or a physician or a therapist has to risk their own career, right, to keep confidentiality. So if their patient just says something and then goes and does something, if there's any tie to them, right, if they're liable, yeah. So he says, without substantial assurance of confidentiality, those requiring treatment will be deterred from seeking assistance. Oh, go figure. Why aren't people sharing the crazy stuff in their minds with their friends and family? Because they think that they're going to look crazy, right? So they want someone they can trust who's not going to go like rattle all the, oh man, this guy, careful of him. He's got some weird shit going up in his head, right? Oh, welcome to the club. Or haven't you noticed that there's a little thing that just spits stuff out into your awareness, whether you want it to or not? Full disclosure. Secondly, the guarantee of confidentiality is essential in eliciting the full disclosure necessary for effective treatment. The psychiatric patient approaches treatment with conscious and unconscious inhibitions against revealing his innermost thoughts. Every person, however well motivated, has to overcome resistances to therapeutic exploration. These resistances seek support from every possible source, and the possibility of disclosure would easily be employed in the service of resistance. unless a patient can trust a psychiatrist not to violate their confidential relationship. The unconscious psychological control mechanism of repression will prevent the recall of past experiences. So, yeah, again, if the patient comes in just fearful his psychiatrist is going to report him to Big Brother or something, is he really going to do the sort of self-processing and digging up like past repressed memories and feelings and experiences? No, he's going to have like his guard up, like we all do. Or didn't you know? Some of us. Next, they say patients will only be helped if they can form a trusting relationship with the psychiatrist. All authorities appear to agree that if the trust relationship cannot be developed because of collusive communication between the psychiatrist and others, treatment will be frustrated even if there's full disclosure. If the trust isn't there, the full disclosure doesn't do enough, right? And so obviously it thwarts it. I think probably the worst is what it does to psychiatry, right? And then this extends into other areas of the medical field, this duty to warn, because now there's just physicians and therapists have an over inclination to over report, right? It's better to err on the side of, oh, I wish my boss would die or have a heart attack, right? Say, I don't know, he might have some ill intent here. On off chance that he does go crazy, even though it might be 1 in a million, right? Rather than have him go kill his boss, it comes back that he revealed this. Now you're negligent. Now your entire life, career and financial livelihood, ability to provide your family shot. And then what happens? This is White's argument, right? He says the duty to warn, creating this increases violence, civil commitment, because more people are going to avoid therapy. And what happens if they avoid therapy? All of those problems that are just get suppressed and suppressed. Like, here's the thing: all emotions manifest themselves somehow. If you don't process them properly, they become twisted and perverted, and it ends up in violence and greater destruction to society. So both here's the interesting thing. This is a perfect example of rule utilitarianism. The Supreme Court justices are trying to figure out which rule, if made into principle, would result in the greatest good to the greatest number. Now, both the majority and the minority think that their approach is going to result in a decrease in violence in society, right? They both think that the other one is going to, like, it. The majority thinks by not reporting, more people are going to die, right? Tatiana is going to get shot and Podar is going to shoot her, right? Because we didn't report. The dissenting party, Clark, is saying, no, no, no. Creating this duty to warn, duty to protect is going to result in far more violence. Because one, the people who most need treatment before they become violent are going to be deterred because they can't trust their therapist. They won't be open with their therapist. They know that the therapist will report them, et cetera, et cetera. And what happens if they don't go to therapy? Then they just go into their bad practice, their bad behaviors, right? And they make the case that you can't expect doctors to be able to predict violence. You don't know what threats are. I mean, this is an interesting thing because sometimes you feel like you do know who's a danger and who's not. But like, threats run a mile a minute and people can read into it. And are you really going to incarcerate somebody on just something that they say off the cuff? So they say uncertainty necessitates high commitments. It's better to commit 20 harmless to stop one violent, right? That's kind of the thrust of this. Yeah. Now, before we end this section, I really want people to think about where they fall on this. Do we have a duty to warn? What's the duty? What are the parameters of it? Would it produce a greater decrease in violence or increase in violence? Can we hold physicians and therapists and health workers responsible for being able to predict who's dangerous? Well, just to back you up, whatever you feel, in the notes on 106, in a well-known study, psychiatrists predicted that 989 persons were so dangerous that they could not be kept even in civil mental hospitals, but would have to be kept in maximum security hospitals run by the Department of Corrections. Most dangerous, 989. Then, because of the United States Supreme Court decision, those persons were transferred to civil hospitals. After a year, the Department of Mental Hygiene reported that 1/5 of them had been discharged to the community, and over half had agreed to remain as voluntary patients. During the year, only 7 of the 989 committed or threatened any act that was sufficiently dangerous to require retransfer to the maximum security hospital. 7 correct predictions out of almost 1,000 is not a very impressive record. Other studies, and there are many, have reached the same conclusion. Psychiatrists simply cannot predict dangerous behavior. So that is Tarasov versus Board of Regents. We're going to do HIV disclosure soon. What else do I want in here? Duty to warn, duty to care. These are really interesting. So these are later case amendments. So basically, the Tarasov precedents asserted that if you do have direct warning from a person to warn a third party, you have to. It then looks at, well, let's say it's Podar's dad who comes in. You don't have really, you're in therapy with Podar, and his dad's like, hey, I heard him say he wants to kill this girl. Do you have a duty to warn because the dad said so? Well, at first they said not, and later they said yes. And what we'll find is that this gets specific to each state. This will have a link. This link here doesn't work. Tale of Two States. It's just the end of my stuff. But if your instructor can find his wherewithal, and it's interesting. You think, well, the Tarasov case is a good demonstration that we do have a duty to warn. But if you were Justice Clark, the dissenting party, you might say that actually this case proves his point, because Podar was successfully going to therapy up until, and hopefully benefiting from it, up until Dr. Lawrence or Moore reported him to the police. And what happened? He stopped going to therapy, didn't he? The trust was destroyed. And then what happened? He reverted to violence. So isn't that almost a case in point that, hey, maybe therapy or breaking confidentiality isn't the best and you should have kept in therapy, right? Just a thought. Now, did you know, they don't say in neither of these, that Podar moved in with Tatiana's brother in the weeks before he murdered her? Like, the family was clueless. They had no idea. He moved in with it like the brother. Yeah, talk about, anyway, living peacefully in India, right? So, briefly, we're going to look at, you know what, we'll do this in the next video, okay? That'll be enough for now.